We have a variety of NHL news to discuss today, including news from the NHL waiver wire. We have some injury updates, a COVID update for the Buffalo Sabres, another important piece there, some trade rumors looking at teams like the Penguins, the Islanders, the Leafs, plus big news for the Canadian teams when it comes to players needing to isolate when they enter Canada. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about here today. Let's jump in first to the big breaking news that came earlier. The federal government in Canada is expected to announce and confirm here that the Canadian NHL teams will no longer be required for their players entering Canada. So if they make a trade or pick up a player coming from the US, they will not have to quarantine for 14 days anymore. That is being reduced to 7 days. So that's a pretty big thing for Canadian teams ahead of the NHL trade deadline, especially. Obviously they could trade within each other and have some different rules, but obviously that opens up a lot of options for them to not have to be without the new acquired player for such a long stretch of time. As we know, we've seen it happen with a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois. After 2 weeks, come in after being off for that long, he ended up getting hurt. It just really was a tough adjustment and a tough period to go through isolation. It's not easy for anybody, and obviously you won't really have to do that. So clearly this is a major help to those 7 Canadian teams. Obviously, it's a help to a degree for the American teams because it gives them more teams to talk trade with, more dance partners, if you will, and that makes things easier to get business done. I mean, we're still about 3 weeks from the NHL trade deadline. There's still lots of time here for teams to get together and make trades. I do expect there to be probably a little bit of a flurry ahead of the deadline for teams to kind of jump on and get ahead of this, which we sometimes see, and especially even with a 7-day isolation rule, it's still an extra week, and in some cases that could be as many as 3 to 4 games that they could end up missing if they end up being in isolation. I do think there will be teams out there that make their trades based on schedule to a degree if they can do it ahead of time. Like, I'm really surprised we haven't seen anything out of Toronto yet, but maybe they had enough information to think this was going to be reduced, and perhaps that would be enough to wait. So we'll see what happens here. But now that that's been coming through, I wouldn't be surprised if we see, even if it's nothing too major, like at least some trades starting to take place here sooner than later. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot of a rather variety of news. We'll get into the trade rumors here in a few minutes. First up, we have some news on the waiver wire. The Senators have placed defenseman Christian Wolanin on waivers. It's a bit of a surprise to many Sens fans this morning when they found that out. Wolanin's not really a prospect anymore. He's 26 years old. He's obviously a player who came into the NHL a little bit later after playing, several seasons of college hockey. So he's a late turning pro in that regard, but still has put in his time in the minors, and it certainly had its ups and downs with the NHL here. Last year was a lost season for him. He came into training camp and ended up with a torn labrum issue with his shoulder and missed the entire year. So that was a big blow to him. He was expected to take on a definitely regular top 6 role, if not even possibly top 4 last year. Got derailed by the injury. And this year, I think he's been okay, but not as good as expected to be. And to me, he does look a little different. I think that the injury is still impacting him. He doesn't seem to be quite the same player, but I am still surprised they put him through waivers. So he is also potentially going to be a Group 6 unrestricted free agent because of his age and games played. So he could be a UFA or he could be an RFA, depending on how much more opportunity he gets to play this year. So wouldn't be shocking to see a team pick him up. Obviously, he's still young enough with a cheap contract under $1 million that it's not a big deal for teams to take him on, especially in Canada, where he wouldn't have far to go. So we'll see if he ends up with the Senators or not. If he does clear, I expect him to be assigned to Belleville. And, he very well could end up walking at the end of the year, even if he does stay with the Sens, given the fact, like I said, if they're going to send him to Belleville, he'll be in jeopardy of missing out his games played that he needs in order to be an RFA at the end of the year. So we'll see how that goes and report back tomorrow. Now, there's lots of other news to talk about here today. I just wanted to do a quick update on the Tim Peel situation that we talked about yesterday. Of course, referee Tim Peel, in case you've been living under a rock and missed the big, huge news yesterday, referee Tim Peel, who was refereeing the Predators and Red Wings the night before, was caught on a live mic, which he didn't know was live, saying how he wanted to call an early penalty on Nashville. Sounded like he either wanted to set the tone or to maybe do a makeup call. I didn't see the first part of the game. game, so I'm not really sure. Those comments seem to be, I believe it was early in the second period, so it was a bad situation. He was immediately, the next morning, was basically fired, essentially. But I know that's what I said when we put the video out. But now that we have more information on the situation, according to Bob McKenzie as well, who is kind of the guru of NHL insiders, he said that basically Peel wasn't really fired. He's basically just taken out of all the additional games here for the rest of the year. He was slated to retire, and he believes, as far as his understanding goes, that this will not impact his pension, and he's still technically kind of on the payroll. He's just not going to be working anymore. He was retiring next month, so I think they're going to kind of just let him ride off into the sunset here and be done. But given the emergence of all the betting business and sports betting that they're trying to get the NHL into, like, they cannot have the integrity of the game jeopardized, and that's certainly, a big thing. So we'll see how this impacts officiating moving forward, if we see any change or what happens. But certainly a bad situation, and the NHL, I think, in my opinion, had no choice but to react swiftly and quickly because of the severity of it. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have some more bad news on the COVID front. The Buffalo Sabres have again been hit hard with the COVID protocols. Their coaching staff, new head coach Don Granato and his assistant Matt Ellis, are now in isolation due to COVID protocols. They cannot go on the bench tonight, so GM Kevin Adams is actually going to go down and run the bench. So we saw this happen earlier in the year to Ralph Kruger. Of course, he ended up testing positive himself. Like, the Sabres coaching staff has really had it rough this year, and obviously we don't know if there's a positive test or if there have been exposures or an inconclusive test. There's a variety of reasons you could end up on the COVID protocol list, so we don't know obviously the full details, but we certainly wish them the best. Hopefully they're okay, and as much as things have been bad in Buffalo this year, they just seem to be finding ways to get worse, which it's just, I feel so bad for Sabres fans. This organization really could use a break, and they need to get themselves back on track, and COVID is just not helping them out even in the least little bit here. Quick update on the injury front as well. The Penguins announced just a little while ago that Kasperi Kapanen is also hurt and will be out week to week. Obviously, that's a big blow for a Penguins team that's already without several forwards that are regulars in the lineup, like Malkin and Zucker and Tanev and Bluger. You add Kapanen in there. I mean, that's I think $28 million in salary cap payroll that's out of the lineup due to injury. That's a big blow. I mean, the Penguins are a team that are, not guaranteed for a playoff spot. They're still well in the mix here, and they should make the playoffs, but still no guarantees. It's a tough break. Assuming they do get through this and make the playoffs, they should have lots of fresh bodies coming back later into the season as we get ready for that. But I would wonder if that's going to impact their plans for the trade deadline, because we can kind of segue from there into some of the trade rumors we're going to talk about, because I do want to talk about the Penguins. There was comments from Brian Burke, the new president of hockey operations, who was hired along with Ron Hextall not too long ago after the resignation of Jim Rutherford. And Burke made comments to say that they definitely would like to add at the deadline, like to add some size, is what he said. Obviously, having all these injuries, though, I wonder if that'll impact their plans. I mean, the Penguins are a team that's really, we've had rumors about what they might do, but there hasn't been anything too substantial in the rumor mill. Like, we've heard a defenseman like a Marcus Pettersson could be a trade piece they use to get some cap flexibility to make some other acquisitions. Obviously, right now, a lot of these players will be back before the season's end, so it's not like we can factor in long-term injury reserve in some of these decisions as well. But there's certainly a team I do expect to be busy. I'm kind of surprised so far, since Burke and Hextall have been in place here, that we haven't really seen much of anything take place. I'm sure, they wanted some time to really do a true evaluation on the job, not just, outside here. So they've had plenty of time to do that. I know goaltending was an issue going in. That's kind of fixed itself. Jerry's been much better. So we'll see what they do. But according to Burke, the Penguins do want to add. They want to add some size, and they're obviously just looking for, some creative ways to get around, a tight cap like many teams, of course, around the NHL. There's also an incident in the Western Hockey League in junior hockey here that's certainly not something you like to hear about. Something that I know personally bothers me a lot. It's very frustrating to see this type of behavior still taking place today after all the work and everything that, as a society and a sports community that we've seen try to be done to eliminate, discrimination of any kind or racism. it's still happening. And there was a situation with the Seattle Thunderbirds of the WHL where a couple of their players have been released from the team due to calling one of their teammates a racial slur. Obviously, he's the only black player on the team. I don't know what they called him exactly, but they called him a racial slur, and they were waving a banana in his face, I guess, is what the report said. Very discouraging to hear that type of stuff, but both players probably have cut themselves out of a future in hockey because of it. The Seattle Thunderbirds want no part of them now. They were released for the rest of the year, and they're not bringing them back next year. And I would think it's probably fair to assume that based on this, that another junior team probably won't pick them up. I mean, most of these teams do not want to be associated with that, and obviously, look at what happened to some other players in the past that we've seen this happen to. Like, it really tarnishes their reputation and eliminates pretty much every opportunity. Look at a guy like Tony DeAngelo at the NHL level, who's had a variety of issues when it comes to behavior, not just that, like these guys, but amongst other things. And nobody wants him. It's really something that they're not going to benefit from in any way. I just don't understand the behavior. It's so frustrating. I'm not sure how talented these players were, if they really had a good shot at making the NHL, but they can probably kiss those dreams goodbye now because of this bad behavior. So unfortunately, one of their teammates had to go through this, but fortunately the organization did the right thing and handled it well, and obviously handed out the punishment appropriately here as well. So we will see how this team responds here, but certainly not the type of news story you like to hear about at any level of sports or just in general. Nobody deserves that. When can we get to the point that everybody just accepts people regardless of race or whatever? It's just, we're all people at the end of the day. This kind of drives me crazy that people can't seem to see that sometimes. Now, as I mentioned as well, a few other trade rumors to talk about. One item that I found interesting from Elliot Friedman in his latest 31 Thoughts column and podcast was talking about the New York Islanders and how they might go about replacing Anders Lee. Now, we've heard a variety of players possibly be mentioned. We've heard Taylor Hall, Kyle Palmieri, but one name that I personally just didn't see being traded at the deadline this year that he brought up and thought would be a great fit, a good replacement for Lee, is Kings winger Dustin Brown. Now, to me, I find that very interesting, but at the same time, normally, I agree with a lot of Friedman's points, but this one I'm going to have to go ahead and disagree with. I mean, yes, Dustin Brown is a rugged winger who can provide a lot of good leadership. He's been around a long time, has Stanley Cups to his name. From all those aspects, yes, you know what? He would technically be a good replacement for Lee. He's still playing at a pretty good level, but he still comes with a not great contract. I mean, for especially the kind of contract that the Islanders would be able to take on. It's not like he's a pending UFA. He's not a rental or anything like that. And obviously, the Kings at this point have really not expressed anything that I've seen or any sources indicating that they were looking to trade him. I mean, from my understanding of it, guys like Brown, Kopitar, and Doughty were going to be with the Kings throughout the whole rebuild and are going to be their core group of leaders that they continue to, use to mentor all these young guys and see if they can get back to being competitive and getting into the playoffs and competing again before those guys are done. That's kind of the plan from way I understood it with what Rob Blake and Luc Robitaille wanted to do there in LA. So personally, I would be quite surprised if Dustin Brown was traded. Would he be a good replacement, as Friedman says? Absolutely. But personally, I think it's more likely that if the Islanders are going to add, and I do think they're going to try their best to do so, a guy like Palmieri in New Jersey, or possibly Taylor Hall, or even a guy like Nick Foligno in Columbus, or something like that, would be probably an easier fit. Now, Lou Lamoriello obviously is very good at keeping things close to the vest and doesn't get a lot of information leaked out of the Islanders, so there's not a lot of solid information to say what their plans might be, but I do expect them to add. I just don't think Dustin Brown's going to be their guy. Now, there's still a lot of talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know there were some eyebrows raised last night at the Flames and Senators game when it was known later into the game that Kyle Dubas, GM of the Leafs, was actually there. Obviously, the Leafs are in town. They play the Senators tonight, so it's not shocking completely, I guess, but when it's the fact that his team's not there, obviously he's going to let the pro scouts do their job when it comes to helping, prepare for their opponents and that kind of stuff. It just made many people think that he must be there to talk to either Pierre Dorion or Brad Treliving of the Calgary Flames and might be working on a deal with one of the Canadian rivals. I mean, the Senators are certainly going to be sellers at the deadline. How much of a seller they're going to be is going to be dependent on how much interest there is and their pending unrestricted free agents. They're probably the only players they would really look to trade at this point. And at the same time, the Calgary Flames, in my opinion, likely are going to become sellers because they're not doing themselves any favors, and they have dug themselves a pretty good hole here, and I don't see the Flames making the playoffs. I really don't. Unfortunately, they're getting between games played and the points. They're not going to likely catch Vancouver, Montreal. I mean, Montreal, to me, is likely going to make that fourth spot. The Canucks are going to have a challenging time too, but the Flames are just falling further and further behind. And I don't see it happening. So could they become sellers? It's a very good possibility. But who on the Flames would they sell? I know many fans are calling for a bit more of a blow up and change, but I think anything too significant would happen in the offseason. So who was Kyle Dubas really there to check out? It's difficult to say, but if anybody, he's probably there looking at some Senators players, in my opinion. Maybe he's looking at Ryan Dzingel, who's been a great fit for the Sens upon his return back to Ottawa. There's a lot of talk he's going to be traded again. I could see him adding that speed and goal scoring touch for the third line. He's on a pretty decent contract. Maybe that's something they're considering. I know obviously they have a guy like Eric Branson and Mike Riley on the blue line. There's a lot of talk they want to add some blue line depth. Now, they can probably do better as far as quality of player out there, but will they be able to meet the price tag and give up as much? It's hard to say. I mean, there's several defensemen out there the Leafs are reported to look at, and from what I'm seeing today, there's a lot of people really believe they want to add two pieces, being a solid defenseman and that middle six winger or center. I mean, so some people think they're going to go for a center, and I think they could benefit possibly from having a guy who can play center, especially if Kerfoot's involved in a trade to go out, but I'm just not a lot out there to me that really fits their needs. So, maybe they could get a player who can play center or wing. But, part of the concern with the Leafs, too, is that a lot of the players they're most reported on here as being most interested in are guys from the Nashville Predators. Now, the Predators have been winning games lately and are climbing themselves back into this playoff race. And there's many NHL reporters and insiders saying, you know what, maybe the Predators are not going to be sellers. Like, if they can get into the playoffs, they're likely not going to sell off all these assets that teams like the Leafs and others are really interested in. So that certainly poses a bit of a conundrum for teams like them that are looking at these guys, and maybe they need to have plans, B, C, and D in place, which they likely would have anyway. So hard to say what happens. But as far as defensemen that the Leafs are reportedly looking at, of course, you get Ekholm in a mix, who's been out there for a while, and you rate it near the top of the list. You get Alex Goligoski in Arizona. His name's gone up the trade bait board. A lot of teams are reportedly expressing some interest there. Like I said, you got Branson. I'm not really sure they've been linked specifically to him, but I do feel he likely will be moved if somebody wants to take him on as a pending UFA rental. But some other guys you can't forget about is David Savard in Columbus. You've also got Josh Manson in Anaheim and even Brandon Montour in Buffalo. Any of those guys would be great for the Maple Leafs. I mean, if they can get somebody who can play top 4 minutes especially, and, they can make that top 4 even better. We've talked a lot about a potential combination trade with the Predators. Like, maybe they could get Ekholm and Granlund for a variety of Kerfoot, a first round pick, throw in a top prospect, something to that nature. But they could probably do the same thing with a team like Columbus if they want to get like Foligno and Savard, who are both rentals. Might be a better price tag there and might be easier to pull off. I mean, I know the Jackets seem to be somewhat reluctant to trade Foligno, but if they have like a handshake agreement that he'll come and re-sign in the summertime, let him go chase the Stanley Cup with the Leafs, I think he'd be open to that myself. So we'll see what happens. But obviously Kyle Dubas is a busy guy. It was interesting to see him at the game last night, and we'll see what they do in the coming days and weeks ahead. But that 7-day rule as opposed to 14 is going to help them and all the other Canadian teams out substantially when it comes to deciding what they're going to do ahead of the trade deadline. So let me know your thoughts on all the latest news here today down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.